Nobody and nothing will affect you again. Buddhist insight you need to hear. It began not with thunder, but with stillness. In a remote village framed by rice fields and mountain fog, there lived an old monk whose silence was more commanding than sermons, and whose eyes had seen the rise and fall of countless seasons. One morning, beneath a tree gnarled by time, a traveler asked him the question many of us have silently asked ourselves. "Master, how do you remain calm in such a chaotic world?" The monk smiled, not with arrogance, but with the ease of someone who had long since stopped resisting life. He replied, "Because I stopped trying to hold the wind." That line wasn't poetry, it was truth. And it is the thread that runs through every second of this video. Welcome to one of the most important conversations you'll have this year, not with me, but with yourself. This video isn't just a motivational speech. It's not another listicle disguised as spiritual advice. It's a guidepost, a map for anyone over 50 who's tired of being pulled by expectations, haunted by regrets, or overwhelmed by noise. If you've been looking for peace in a world that profits from your anxiety, you've just found shelter. What follows in the next chapters are not theories. They are distilled wisdom from Buddhist philosophy, real-life experience, and ageless human truth. Each chapter will open a door, some will challenge you, some will soothe you, all will call you home. So here is my invitation, watch until the end. Every minute of this video was designed with intention. Each section builds upon the last. And if you stay until the final breath, I promise, something inside you will shift. This is more than content, it's a return. A return to the part of you that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop caring about what doesn't deserve your energy. At this stage in life, maybe after raising children, building a career, surviving loss, navigating love, and weathering more than a few storms, you've likely become very good at caring. You've learned how to put others first, how to stay up late worrying about people who never called back, how to keep the peace by silencing your own discomfort. You've spent decades tuning yourself like a delicate instrument to the moods of others. But here's the truth, there is a difference between caring and carrying. And carrying, especially the weight that was never yours to begin with, is what's been silently draining your spirit. Buddhist teachings do not shame compassion. In fact, KRU letter 1E47A macron, compassion, is one of its 4 immeasurable virtues. But compassion is not the same as emotional servitude. When caring becomes compulsive, when it morphs into anxiety, guilt, people-pleasing, or the inability to say no, it stops being a virtue. It becomes attachment. Let me tell you a story. A young woman came to the Buddha, her face streaked with tears. Her neighbor had insulted her publicly, questioned her integrity, humiliated her in front of her village. "How can I find peace when people speak so cruelly?" she asked. The Buddha, in his quiet wisdom, replied with a question. "If a man brings you a gift, but you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" She blinked, surprised. "To the man, I suppose." "Oh, exactly," he said. "So why have you accepted this insult as your own?" In a single moment, he gave her freedom, not by changing the world, but by changing her relationship to it. The truth is, most of us were never taught this kind of wisdom. We were raised in households where silence was a strategy, where duty came before inner peace. We were told that being a good person meant being constantly available, agreeable, and apologetic. But Buddhism teaches us that you can still be loving and say, "This is not mine to carry." Think of yourself as a tree. When the wind blows harshly through the branches, the tree does not chase the wind. It bends, it sways, but it remains rooted. Your peace is not in controlling the breeze, but in deepening the roots. Ask yourself this: do I really need to explain myself every time I'm misunderstood? Is this worth the loss of my sleep, my appetite, my clarity? Does this interaction uplift my mind, or is it a hook pulling me into old pain? If the answer leans toward depletion, release it. Let it go without drama, without resentment. That too is compassion for yourself. In our culture, reactivity is often mistaken for relevance. People believe that if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. But in Buddhist insight, constant reactivity is a symptom of enslavement. You become like a bell struck by every passing impulse, ringing on command. Real strength lies in the pause. In the moment you feel the pull and choose stillness instead. There is a quiet kind of power that comes from realizing. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't need to correct every misunderstanding. You don't need to carry stories that are not yours. You can bow gently and walk away. You can listen with love and still not engage. You can forgive someone silently and still say no with your energy. We live in a world of noise, notifications, opinions, comparisons, performance. But here, as what the Buddha knew long before smartphones and 24/7 outrage culture, peace does not come when everything is finally fixed. Peace comes when we no longer take everything personally. Let me say that again with the kindness of a friend who has walked this path a little longer than you. Peace comes when your inner world is no longer dictated by the chaos of the outer one. You're allowed to care deeply and still not carry everything. You're allowed to respond with compassion and still say, "This doesn't belong in my mind." You're allowed to take your energy back from the past, from people who have drained it, from regrets that never resolved. This is not selfish, this is sacred. So the next time your peace feels disturbed, before you rush in to fix it or to defend your worth, take a breath and ask, does this truly deserve my energy? Is this love or is this obligation wrapped in fear? If the answer is silence, let it be. If the answer is stillness, honor it. And if the answer is no, this is not mine, then smile and let it float downstream like a fallen leaf on a calm river. You are not a container for other people's unprocessed pain. You are not a storage unit for guilt and shame and recycled opinions. You are a soul returning home to the calm center that was never lost, only covered in noise. This chapter, dear one, is your permission slip. You've done enough carrying. Now just breathe and begin letting go. Chapter 2, The Illusion of Control, Chasing Clouds with Chains. We all want to feel safe, so we plan, we prepare. We organize our calendars, our finances, even our emotions, trying to outmaneuver the future. Most of us were raised to believe that if we're disciplined enough, cautious enough, responsible enough, we'll be protected from life's sharp edges. But somewhere along the way, this responsible planning quietly turned into something else, control. And control, unlike wisdom, does not liberate, it traps. It's easy to confuse the two, especially in a world that rewards hustle and micromanagement. But control is not peace, it's the illusion of peace dressed up in anxiety. You see, trying to control life is like chasing clouds with chains. You run, you reach, you grasp, but no matter how hard you try, the clouds slip through your fingers. They were never meant to be held, and neither was life. Let me share a story. A retired man once sat with me in deep frustration. He had done everything right, worked hard for decades, saved every penny. Built a home by the ocean for his golden years, a dream he had clung to for half his life. And then, in a single week, a storm swept through. It tore the roof from his house, flooded his belongings, and with it, shattered his vision of what retirement was supposed to be. He looked at me with eyes heavy from trying to make sense of it all and asked, "Why didn't life respect my effort?" I paused before answering. "Maybe," I said gently, "life wasn't punishing you. Maybe it was freeing you from the illusion that peace comes from structure. What if this was an invitation, not to hold tighter, but to finally let go?" He blinked, and after a long silence, something in him softened. Not in defeat, but in surrender. You see, Buddhism teaches that suffering doesn't come from what happens to us, it comes from our resistance to what happens. We suffer because things didn't go the way we told ourselves they should. But who decided that? Who wrote that script? Was it your parents, society, your younger self? Control is a story we tell ourselves to feel less vulnerable. But in truth, control is fragile. Reality has no loyalty to your expectations. Life doesn't follow our plans, it follows its own rhythm. There's an old Zen metaphor I love. Imagine sitting by a river. Leaves float by, some beautiful, some decaying. You don't jump in, you don't grab the leaves, you just sit. Observe, let them pass. This is how we can begin to view life, and more importantly, our thoughts, our plans, our fears. Not everything that floats by needs our involvement. And just like the river, life keeps flowing, whether we're trying to dam it up or not. The question is, will you swim with it, or exhaust yourself swimming against it? Letting go doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean you stop caring or acting. Quite the opposite, letting go means you align your actions with presence, not pressure. You plant the seed with devotion, but you stop checking every 5 minutes to see if it's sprouting. That's not faith, that's fear. The truth is, real peace comes not when everything is controlled, but when everything is surrendered. You may still lose things, the job, the relationship, the plan, the house by the ocean. But when you stop clinging to how things should go, you begin to experience how beautiful things actually are. Because in that space of surrender, something opens up, clarity, lightness, even joy. Let go not because you're giving up. Let go because you're growing up. Let go because the sky was never meant to be caged, and neither were you. Chapter 3: How Society Programs You to Care, the Matrix of Approval. You weren't born needing approval. As a baby, you didn't care how you looked, whether your cries were too loud or if anyone liked your outfit. You existed in your raw, unfiltered truth. You were hungry, you cried. You were tired, you slept. You were curious, you explored. But slowly, the world taught you to shape yourself into something presentable. It started with small things: be a good girl, don't talk back, smile even if you don't feel like it. Then came school, where you learned that gold stars and applause were the currency of belonging. And before long, your inner compass, your own sense of enoughness, was buried beneath layers of other people's expectations. That's how the matrix of approval begins. We start living not from our truth, but from the desire to be seen in a certain way. We become performers in our own lives, adjusting our words, emotions, even values, hoping someone out there will clap loud enough to make it all feel worth it. But applause fades, and what's left after the noise dies down, often an aching sense that we've spent years trying to earn something that should have been ours from the start: peace. Buddhism teaches us that suffering often begins the moment we confuse external validation with inner truth. The more you depend on others to mirror your worth, the more fragile your self-esteem becomes. Let me offer you a story. There was once a monk who walked into the marketplace every morning, carrying a bowl not for food, but for insults. "Why would you do that?" a young student asked him. The monk smiled. "Because the day I'm no longer moved by praise or insult alike is the day I'm truly free." That story stuck with me. Because we often think our goal is to be loved, to be admired, to be respected. But in Buddhist insight, the real goal is to be free. And sometimes, freedom means not caring what the crowd thinks, even if the crowd is your family, your coworkers, your community, or that old high school classmate who still stalks your Facebook. Here is something we don't talk about enough as we age: how much of our identity was scripted by someone else. We chase a career path because it makes sense. We get married because it's the right time. We buy the house, have the kids, attend the parties, play the roles, and somewhere in the quiet moments, we hear a whisper: is this really me, or just the version of me they expect? This isn't about rebellion, it's about return. Returning to who you were before the world told you who to be. Try this simple exercise today. Sit quietly with a pen and paper. Ask yourself, what am I chasing that I never chose? Is it a body image that makes you feel worthy? A version of success that leaves you empty. Approval from someone who doesn't even know your heart. Every answer will reveal a rope that's been pulling on your soul, and every time you name one, you begin to untie it. Society teaches us to measure everything, our productivity, our beauty, our bank balance, our achievements. But Buddhism reminds us, not everything that can be measured matters, and not everything that matters can be measured. You don't need to be spectacular, you need to be sincere. You don't need to be understood, you need to be at peace. You don't need to be liked by everyone, you just need to live aligned with your truth. That's where your real power is, not in applause, but in authenticity. So next time you find yourself changing your words to avoid judgment, or shrinking your light to make someone else comfortable, pause and ask, am I living for approval or from alignment? Is this decision about truth or about being liked? There's nothing wrong with wanting to connect. We are wired for relationship. But when your worth is rented out to everyone else's opinions, you lose the ability to belong to yourself. And you, dear soul, were never meant to be a puppet. You were meant to walk freely, with your back straight, your heart soft, and your truth unshaken by the crowd. Let them think what they think, let the spotlight fade, let the noise pass. Because when the show ends and you're finally alone with yourself, the only approval that will matter is your own. And in that stillness, in that radical honesty, in that return to your own heartbeat, you'll remember, you are already enough. Chapter 4: The Art of Detachment. Imagine holding a rose too tightly. At first, your instinct is to protect it, to claim it, keep it, make sure it doesn't fall away. But the tighter you squeeze, the quicker the petals bruise, the thorns dig into your skin. What was once beautiful becomes painful, not because the rose changed, but because you held it in a way it was never meant to be held. Now imagine opening your palm and letting the rose simply rest there. It's still yours in a way. But now it can breathe, now it doesn't hurt. That, dear soul, is detachment. It's one of Buddhism's most misunderstood teachings. People hear detachment and think it means shutting down, not caring, walking away from love or responsibility. But true detachment is nothing like that. Detachment is not cold, it's clear. It's not about indifference, it's about intimacy without clinging. Buddhism teaches us that attachment, not love, not loss, but attachment is the root of suffering. We cling because we fear change. We grasp because we think if we hold on tight enough, we can stop things from slipping away. But the truth is, everything slips away. The body you live in, the roles you've played, the people you've cherished, the routines that once shaped your identity, all of it will change. It's not a threat, it's a law of nature. And it's not something to fear, but something to understand deeply. Detachment doesn't mean you don't love your partner, your children, your home, or your memories. It means you love them without trying to possess them. It means you accept their impermanence, and because of that, you can appreciate them even more fully, with reverence, with softness. In the second half of life, this teaching comes not just as philosophy, but as lived experience. As your body softens, as your calendar grows quieter, as the roles you've carried for years begin to fade, there's a new kind of space that opens up. One that asks you to stop gripping and start witnessing. This is where detachment becomes a grace, a letting go that feels like coming home. You realize you don't need to be in control to be at peace. You don't need to be right to feel whole. You don't need to be needed to feel love. You are simply here, present, available, open. Think of your life like a river. The water moves. Some days it rushes with joy. Some days it trickles with grief. Sometimes it carries memories you wish would stay. Sometimes it sweeps away what you never wanted to lose. But the river does not stop for you, and it doesn't ask for your permission. All you can do is choose. Will you fight the current, clinging to each moment as if it's yours to keep? Or will you learn to float, arms open, heart soft, letting each experience pass through you like water through an open hand? This is the art of detachment. Try this in your daily life. When a thought arises, maybe about something you miss, someone who hurt you, or a plan that fell apart, don't fight it. Don't chase it. Just say to yourself, that's a thought, I see it, I let it pass. When someone disappoints you, instead of closing your heart or gripping the hurt, try asking, can I allow this pain to be here without letting it define me? And when something beautiful happens, a call from an old friend, a breeze through the trees, a quiet evening with tea, try to receive it fully without attaching to it. Let it be complete even if it's fleeting. You see, detachment isn't about having less, it's about holding everything with less fear. It's about letting love breathe, letting moments come and go. Letting life unfold, not on your timeline, but in its own sacred rhythm. And most of all, it's about being present, not because you've frozen your emotions, but because you've stopped chaining them to expectations. One of the most beautiful lessons Buddhism offers is this: we suffer not because things change, but because we believe they should not. But what if change is the gift? What if letting go is not a loss, but a sacred return? You don't have to grip your memories to keep them. You don't have to cling to relationships to honor them. You don't have to control life to experience it fully. You can love with an open hand. You can live with an open heart. And you can let go not because you don't care, but because you finally understand what care truly means. Let the rose rest in your palm. Let the river carry you. Let each moment arrive and leave without begging it to stay. And in that softness, that openness, that spacious awareness, you will discover a peace that no possession could ever promise. Chapter 5: What happens when you stop reacting? Imagine a glass of muddy water. If you keep shaking it, stirring it, swirling it, the sediment never settles. It stays cloudy, chaotic, impossible to drink. But if you leave it alone, if you simply let it be, clarity begins to return on its own. This, my dear friend, is the nature of the human mind. Every time we react, whether it's to a careless comment, a rude driver, a passive-aggressive text, we shake the glass. And we don't just shake it once. We often replay the moment 100 times in our heads. We justify, we defend, we draft imaginary responses in the shower. We rehearse arguments while cooking dinner. We live in the echo chamber of our own reactivity. But what if we just did? What if instead of rushing to react, we paused? Buddhist teachings speak often about the sacred pause. It is the moment between stimulus and response, the space where freedom lives. The Buddha once said that the mind is like a candle flame in the wind. If we react to every breeze, it flickers constantly. But if we shelter it with awareness, it steadies and glows. In practical terms, this means when something triggers you, take a breath. Seriously, just one deep, intentional breath. It sounds small, but it's enormous. That breath is not just air, it's your return to yourself. It's a gentle declaration that you are not a puppet pulled by every string, that you can choose how you show up. Most of us were never taught how to pause. We were taught how to argue, how to prove, how to make a point, how to get the last word. But the older you get, the more sacred your energy becomes. You don't have time to be emotionally hijacked by every petty situation. You don't have to answer every challenge. You don't have to chase understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. Let them think what they think. Let the moment pass without turning it into a war. Because when you do that, when you stop reacting, you're not losing power. You're reclaiming it. Stillness is not passivity. Stillness is power with its ego stripped away. It's the grandmother who smiles without engaging in gossip. It's the elder who doesn't rise to the bait of family drama. It's the person who knows the difference between peace and being right. When you pause, you stop bleeding energy. You stop rehearsing insults. You stop trading your peace for the illusion of control. You begin to operate from clarity, not chaos, from wisdom, not wound. Try this next time you feel provoked. Pause, place your hand gently over your heart. Breathe in for a count of 3. Breathe out for a count of 5. Then silently say, I don't have to react. That's not weakness, that's discipline. And over time, your nervous system learns a new habit, not to flinch, not to defend, not to spiral, but to stay present, to stay grounded. To stay kind, even if only to yourself. One of the most powerful things you can realize is this: you are not responsible for controlling what other people say. You are only responsible for choosing how much of it you invite into your temple. And your mind, your heart, is a temple. Would you let anyone walk in and spray graffiti on its walls? Of course not. So why do we let every careless word, every imagined slight, every unsolicited opinion shake us to our core? Let them pass, let them float by like leaves on a stream. You are not here to react, you are here to wake up. Waking up means recognizing when you are being baited. It means knowing that not every injustice needs your commentary. That not every misunderstanding requires an explanation. That peace is more valuable than winning. And perhaps most importantly, that stillness is not empty, it is full of truth. It is in the silence after a storm that you can finally hear the birds. It is in the still mind that real wisdom emerges. So practice the sacred pause. It may seem small in the moment, but it builds a life that is big, big with calm, big with clarity, big with compassion. When you stop reacting, you stop being tossed by every wave, and instead you become the ocean itself, vast, deep, and undisturbed. Chapter 6. You are not your thoughts, the sky behind the storm. And it's true, your thoughts, your worries, your memories, opinions, fears, cravings. They're just passing clouds drifting across the vast, open sky of your awareness. But most of us don't live like the sky, we live like the weather. One anxious thought appears, and suddenly we are that storm. One old regret arises, and we're right back in that moment, heart racing, stomach tight. We don't just observe our thoughts, we merge with them, we believe them, we become them. But here's the truth, soft, profound, and liberating. You are not your thoughts, you never were. This is one of the most compassionate teachings in all of Buddhism. It tells us that we are not broken, we are not defective, we are simply mistaking the scenery for the self. Imagine this. You're sitting by a road, cars are driving past, some are beautiful, some are rusted, some are loud and scary, but none of them are you. You're just sitting there watching. That's your mind in meditation. Your thoughts are the cars, you are the observer. And just like a good observer, your job isn't to chase every car, or jump in front of them, or try to repaint them as they pass. Your only task is to notice, there goes a thought. Let's get practical. The next time a thought pops up, I'm not good enough, it's too late for me, I always mess things up, pause, don't argue with it, don't try to prove it wrong. Just recognize it for what it is, a temporary weather pattern. Say to yourself, that's a thought. Not the truth, not my truth, just a thought. Give it a name if it helps. Call it old shame, or the critic, or that voice from childhood. Greet it like an old neighbor who still drops by uninvited. You don't have to invite them in for tea, just nod and let them pass. The Buddha once taught that thoughts are like illusions, they rise and fall, often fueled by habit, memory, conditioning, and karma. Most of our thoughts aren't fresh insights, they're recycled noise, echoes from the past, ghosts of opinions we absorbed long ago, and yet we let them rule us, we let them decide what we're worth, we let them choose our responses. We let them paint the world in colors that were never ours to begin with. But when you stop identifying with every thought, when you can sit and simply see the mind doing its thing, you create space, and in that space, clarity, freedom. Compassion, think of it this way, your mind is not your enemy, it's just overactive. Like a puppy that hasn't been trained, it's not malicious, it just doesn't know how to sit still. And your job is not to punish it. Your job is to lovingly retrain it. That's where meditation comes in. Not to control your thoughts, but to become familiar with them, to stop being startled every time they bark. Sit, breathe, let the thoughts come, let them go. Some will feel heavy, that's okay. Some will feel silly, that's okay too. The key is not to stop thinking. The key is to stop believing every thought that arises. One of the deepest shifts in spiritual maturity is when you stop asking, "Is this thought true?" And start asking, "Is this thought helpful?" Because here's the thing, some thoughts may have a kernel of truth. Yes, maybe you did waste some time. Yes, maybe you've made some mistakes, but does dragging that thought into your present bring healing? Or does it chain you to the past? If it doesn't nourish your clarity or strengthen your peace, let it drift by like a passing cloud. You don't need to analyze every thunderstorm in your mind. Just learn to sit under the shelter of stillness until the skies clear. As we age, this practice becomes not just helpful, but essential, because the mind will want to replay the past. It will want to predict the future. It will drag up old regrets like stones from the riverbed, but you don't have to hold on to them. You can let the storm rage overhead while your roots remain untouched. Like a mountain unmoved by wind, you can learn to remain still. Grounded, calm, compassionate toward yourself, because beneath every thought, every feeling, every story you've ever carried, there is something truer, a presence, a quiet, steady sky, and that, dear one, is who you truly are. Chapter 7, Stop Seeking Approval, the Mirror of Still Water. At some point in life, often after decades of trying, you wake up to a quiet ache. It's not pain exactly, it's more like a hollowness. A soft exhaustion from constantly shaping yourself to fit what others might approve of. You look back and realize how often your smile was a mask, how often your decisions were rehearsed for the applause of people who weren't even listening that closely. It's humbling. You start to wonder, who was I living for? Your children, your parents, your boss, your spiritual teacher, your spouse, your social circle. And then the hardest question of all, when was the last time I acted not to impress, but to align? In Buddhism, we're taught that clinging to external approval is a form of suffering. It's subtle, socially rewarded, and often deeply ingrained, but it is still suffering. Why? Because the more you outsource your sense of worth to the opinions of others, the more fragile that worth becomes. You're only as whole as their last compliment. You're only as peaceful as their latest reaction. You're always waiting, hoping, managing your expression, your tone, your choices, just to be acceptable. It's spiritual starvation, and you deserve better than that. Imagine your soul as a still pond. When it's undisturbed, it reflects the truth clearly, your wisdom, your intentions, your unique beauty. But every time you seek approval, it's like throwing a stone into the water. The ripples distort the reflection. The surface gets cloudy. And suddenly you lose sight of who you really are. Approval seeking is not bad because it's vain. It's harmful because it's confusing. It pulls you away from your center, your purpose, your peace. The more you perform, the further you drift from the deep, still place within you where your truth quietly waits. You were not born to be approved of. You were born to awaken. You were not born to be consumed. You were born to connect. You were not born to be admired. You were born to be free. The Buddha never taught his followers to seek praise. He never said, be popular. He said, be awake. He said, know yourself. He said, detach from illusion. And illusion, my friend, is exactly what approval is. It changes with the mood of the room. It disappears when the spotlight shifts. It's never truly about you, only about how others interpret fragments of you. Try this practice. When you catch yourself editing your truth, your words, your appearance, your choices, for the sake of being liked, pause, take a breath. Place your hand over your heart and ask, is this really me? Am I speaking from truth or from fear of rejection? Then gently remind yourself, I am already enough. Not because you're perfect, but because you're present, because you're honest, because you exist, and that is enough. It's okay to want to be loved. It's human to crave connection, but connection that depends on approval is brittle. It snaps the moment you step out of character. Real love doesn't require performance. It recognizes you in your quiet moments. It sees you when you're messy, uncertain, and fully alive. You don't need to be impressive to be lovable. You don't need to be admired to be worthy. You only need to return to the center of the pond, to the still reflection that appears when you stop stirring the water. Here's a radical practice. Stand in front of a mirror. No makeup, no adjusting your shirt, no fixing your expression. Just look and whisper this: I am enough, without applause. I am enough even if no one sees me. I am enough because I have stopped abandoning myself. Say it until your voice doesn't tremble. Say it until the words stop feeling like a question and start feeling like a homecoming. Approval will never give you what your own presence can. The world will never validate you deeply enough to erase your doubts. That's your job. That's your healing, and the beauty is you don't need anyone's permission to begin. You just need your own. Let go of the audience, step off the stage, return to the still water, and meet the real you, quiet, radiant, free. Chapter 8: Say No Without Guilt, Boundaries as Compassion. Saying yes when your heart means no is not kindness, it's quiet self-abandonment, and you know it not just in your mind but in your body. That tightness in your chest when you agree to another commitment you didn't have space for. The quiet resentment that lingers after giving time, money, or energy you couldn't afford. The weariness of carrying emotional burdens that were never yours to carry in the first place. You didn't say yes because you were weak. You said yes because you were trained to believe that love means always being available. But Buddhism teaches us that true compassion begins with yourself. If your generosity comes at the cost of your peace, your health, your dignity, then it's no longer compassion. It's performance, it's sacrifice masked as service, and it slowly erodes the integrity of your inner world. Boundaries are not a rejection of others, they are a sacred affirmation of self. When the Buddha spoke of wise speech, wise action, and wise livelihood, he wasn't talking about pleasing people. He was talking about living in alignment, and alignment requires clarity. It requires knowing where your limits are and honoring them, not just in emergencies, but every day. You are allowed to say, no, I can't. No, I'm not available. No, that doesn't feel right. And that on its own is a complete sentence. You don't owe a backstory. You don't have to soften it with a nervous smile. You don't have to apologize for protecting your own sacred space. Every no that honors your truth is actually a yes to your well-being. It's a yes to your energy, a yes to your healing, a yes to the quiet voice inside you that whispers, you matter too. In Buddhist practice, we talk a lot about right effort. This doesn't mean exhausting yourself. It means applying your energy in a way that is sustainable, skillful, and rooted in wisdom. And wisdom knows. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot keep offering yourself in fragments while neglecting the whole. So start treating your time, your attention, your nervous system as sacred. Protect your mornings, guard your silence. Block off hours that belong to no one but you, not to catch up on tasks, but to breathe, to be. To walk, rest, write, listen to the wind. These are not luxuries, they are spiritual practices. They are acts of devotion to the temple of your being. Let's reframe what boundaries really are. They are not walls, they are doors with locks and thresholds and intentional entryways. Boundaries say, this is what I will allow into my life. They are the architecture that keeps your inner home intact. Without them, everything seeps in. Other people's expectations, their emotional storms, their projections and pressures. And before long, your temple no longer feels like yours. But when you set boundaries, you reclaim your space. You become your own guardian, not from a place of fear, but of deep care. Try this reflection. What have I been saying yes to out of guilt or fear? Where have I betrayed my own needs just to avoid disappointing someone else? What would change if I trusted that my no is not cruelty, but clarity? Boundaries are not about shutting people out. They're about letting the right things in at the right time in the right way. When you say no from a centered place, you don't create conflict, you create trust within yourself. You create a life that feels spacious, grounded, and real. Here's the truth: you are not responsible for everyone's comfort. You are responsible for your own truth, and you are not required to trade your peace for politeness. So when someone reacts, when they pout, guilt trip, or lash out, remember that's their work, not yours. That's their karma, not your duty. Your task is not to carry their disappointment. Your task is to stay aligned with your highest self. To honor your own life as sacred, and sacred lives require space, not just physical but emotional, not just occasional but daily. Create that space like you would tend a garden, with care, with patience, with love. Say no softly, clearly, without guilt, and in doing so, say yes to the life that is finally, fully yours. Chapter 9: Let go of outcome, plant the seed, trust the rain. You did your part, you showed up, you gave your best, you poured yourself into the project, the relationship, the healing, the dream. You gave the time, the heart, the effort, and yet here you are, waiting, hoping, wondering why things haven't bloomed the way you imagined. This is where most suffering begins, not in failure, but in the clinging to outcome. We hold tight to how things should unfold, and when they don't, we confuse the silence of the soil with punishment. But it's not punishment, it's the nature of life. The farmer doesn't scream at the soil, she doesn't tug at the roots, demanding faster growth. She plants, she waters, she tends, and then she waits, in faith, in surrender, in alignment with something larger than her will. The farmer understands what many of us forget: you control the effort, not the harvest, yet we tie our joy to results. We decide we'll be happy when the email arrives, when the diagnosis is clear, when the children behave, when the partner changes, when the account grows. But Buddhism reminds us the future is not promised. The outcome is not yours to hold. The now is. Effort without clinging, that's the path. We call it right effort in the Noble Eightfold Path. It's not passive, it's deeply intentional. You give what you can, you pour your heart into what matters. But then you release the outcome like a bird from your palm, not because you don't care, but because you understand. Attachment is not love, it's fear, and fear suffocates what it tries to protect. Let's bring this home: you sent the message. You don't have to reread it 10 times waiting for a reply. You did your best in that conversation. You don't need to replay every word, wondering if they misinterpreted. You raised your children with love. You don't need to carry guilt for who they've chosen to become. That constant tug-of-war with reality, trying to bend it to your expectations, is exhausting. And more than that, it's futile. Release it. Let it breathe. Let it unfold in its own time. Here's a mantra I've given many of my students: I offer my effort, I release the rest. Repeat it in the waiting room. Repeat it after the job interview. Repeat it when the results come back or don't. Let it become a sacred rhythm in your heart, because in truth, joy isn't born from what blooms. It's born from the love you bring to the planting. And yes, you may never see the results you imagined. But that doesn't mean your effort was wasted. In the Dharma, every wholesome act carries merit, seen or unseen, immediate or delayed. Sometimes your work doesn't change the world, sometimes it just changes you, and that is more than enough. Let go of the illusion that your worth is measured by outcomes. Let go of the myth that effort only matters if it's rewarded. Let go of the belief that you must control the rain to be a good gardener. You are already enough when you plant with care, when you water with love, when you trust the soil even in silence. And when the bloom comes, if it comes, you'll greet it not with grasping but with gratitude, because the point was never control. The point was the offering. Chapter 10: Walk away from what drains you, the silent exit. Not every fire is yours to put out. Not every invitation to conflict deserves your presence. And not every relationship, commitment, or role you've carried for years belongs in the chapter you're entering now. Sometimes the most spiritual decision you can make is not to try harder, but to walk away, quietly, lovingly, without guilt, without performance, without leaving a trail of explanations. just a gentle inward bow that says, "This no longer serves my peace." We often think that strength looks like staying, holding on, enduring, being the last one standing in the ruins of something that once gave us joy. But Buddhism offers a different kind of strength, the courage to let go, the wisdom to know when your energy is no longer being honored, the compassion to recognize when staying costs you your light. You are not obligated to keep investing in people or places that no longer nourish you. You are allowed to choose yourself. And yet, why is it so hard? Because we're conditioned, especially in our earlier years, to believe that walking away is failure. That loyalty means tolerating discomfort indefinitely. That spiritual growth requires constant self-sacrifice, but that's not compassion, that's martyrdom, and over time it corrodes your spirit. True compassion has boundaries. It says, I can love you and still choose not to stay in what harms me. It says, I can be kind and still be gone. There's a Buddhist principle called upekkha, equanimity. It's not indifference, it's not coldness. It's the ability to stay centered, grounded, and peaceful amid the ever-changing tides of life. And sometimes, upekkha asks us to exit, not because we're angry, but because we are aligned. There's a kind of silence that follows a sacred exit. It doesn't shout, it doesn't slam doors. It simply leaves with dignity, with grace, with clarity. Try this reflection. What in your life drains your peace more than it gives? Who or what leaves you feeling smaller, heavier, or disconnected after every interaction? What habit, pattern, or place no longer reflects who you are becoming? Sometimes the draining isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the slow erosion of joy, the subtle tightening in your chest, the heaviness you carry into your mornings. That's your body whispering what your soul already knows. This isn't it anymore. And here's the freedom. You don't need to make a scene to reclaim your energy. You don't need permission to pivot. You don't owe anyone a full account of your inner process. You can simply leave the conversation, leave the expectation. Leave the dynamic where your worth was questioned, where your heart was overlooked, where your presence was assumed and not appreciated. Walk away not in rage but in reverence, not to punish but to protect. Your silence is not avoidance, it is spiritual clarity in motion. As you age, as you soften into wisdom, you begin to understand this truth more fully. You were not born to carry everything, you were born to walk lightly, to move through this world with open palms, not clenched fists, to honor your capacity, not exploit it. To preserve your glow, not exhaust it trying to light fires that were never yours. A silent exit doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care deeply about your health, your time, your evolution. And walking away doesn't always look like moving to a new city or quitting your job. Sometimes it's subtler. It's detaching emotionally from chaos. It's stopping the mental loop of trying to fix what refuses to grow. It's removing your energy from situations that feed off your guilt and call it love. So take the silent exit when your soul calls for it. Trust that your life will rearrange itself to honor the new space you've made. Let the closing of one door be the opening of another, not outside of you but within, because peace isn't always something we find. Often it's something we return to when we stop pouring ourselves into places that no longer reflect our sacredness. Walk away gently, walk away fully, and do not look back. Chapter 11, Practice Emotional Non-Reactivity, Be the Tree. Imagine an old tree. Its roots run deep into the earth, anchoring it through decades of storms, droughts, winds that howled without mercy. The bark may be scarred, the branches may sway, but the tree remains. This is what emotional maturity looks like, not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of reaction. We live in a world that moves fast and hits hard. Disrespect, misunderstanding, disappointment, they come at us like gusts of wind. But Buddhism reminds us you don't have to be the leaf that flutters with every breeze. You can be the tree. You can stay rooted even as life changes form around you. Reactivity is the ego's favorite habit. It rises up instantly, fueled by old wounds and unconscious patterns. Someone says something sharp, and suddenly you're not in the present moment, you're 10 years back, defending yourself again. Someone forgets to acknowledge your effort, and you spiral into stories of being unappreciated. You don't choose the feeling, but you do choose the response, and in that choice is freedom. Buddhism teaches the power of the pause, that sacred space between trigger and reaction. That moment when you could lash out but don't, when you could explain, defend, justify, but instead you breathe, you don't suppress. You don't pretend you're unaffected, you feel everything, but you let the emotion pass through you like wind through branches without letting it uproot your peace. Think of the Buddha under the Bodhi tree. Mara, the embodiment of temptation, fear, and chaos, tried everything to shake him. Illusions, threats, distractions, but the Buddha didn't fight, he didn't react, he simply touched the earth and stayed still. This wasn't passivity. It was profound power, it was embodied awareness. He didn't need to prove anything, he didn't need to control Mara, he only needed to be present, unmoved, observant, awake. That's what emotional non-reactivity looks like in practice. Here's how you begin. Next time someone pushes your buttons, don't respond right away. Close your eyes for a moment, place your awareness in your breath. Feel the energy rise, anger, defensiveness, grief, and say to yourself, this is a wave. I am the ocean. The wave may be intense, but it is temporary, and your awareness, your dignity, your clarity are the vastness beneath it. When we react to everything, we become like leaves in the storm, tossed, thrown, directionless. But when we observe rather than absorb, we gain perspective. You begin to ask, is this about me or about their pain? Is this worth my peace? Will this matter a month from now? And most of the time, the answer is no. Most of the time, the best thing you can do for your growth is not to win the argument, but to outgrow the need to have one. This doesn't mean you never speak up. It means you choose when, how, and why with intention. You respond instead of reacting. You move from a place of centered truth, not emotional chaos. You let your inner stillness, not your wounds, lead the conversation. That's not silence, that's wisdom. Practice this in daily life. When someone cuts you off in traffic, breathe. When your partner says something careless, observe before replying. When your child forgets to say thank you, pause before lecturing. When life throws a curveball, take 3 breaths before rushing to fix it. Each pause is a moment of self-respect. Each still response is a return to your true nature, spacious, kind, rooted. The more you react, the more you are owned by others' moods, by past triggers, by fleeting thoughts. But the more you observe, the more you reclaim your life, and with time, people will notice. They'll say, there's something different about you. You don't get rattled like before. And you'll smile, not because you've become cold, but because you've become steady. The storms will still come, the wind will still blow, but your roots, they'll hold, because you've learned the art of stillness in the face of noise. You've practiced the pause. You've become the tree. Chapter 12, the door was never locked, acceptance as liberation. You've spent years, maybe decades, reaching, searching, knocking at the door of peace, sometimes with desperate fists, sometimes with whispered prayers, sometimes with nothing more than quiet, exhausted hope. You tried fixing, improving, becoming. You sought the right practice, the right book, the right version of yourself. But here's the truth Buddhist teachings gently whisper. The door was never locked. In fact, it was never even closed. Peace didn't require more striving. It required stopping. It asked you not to earn anything, but to allow everything. Acceptance is not resignation. It's not a passive shrug. It's not giving up. It is coming home. It is turning toward your life exactly as it is, without flinching, without bargaining, without needing it to be anything other than what it already is in this moment. This moment may be imperfect. It may be messy. You may carry old regrets, unhealed aches, unresolved questions. But acceptance doesn't wait for the wounds to be gone. Acceptance says, I can love myself with the wound. I can sit beside my suffering without needing to erase it. I can breathe here now with all of it. We are taught from early on that peace is a reward, something we earn by being good enough, wise enough, healed enough. So we chase endlessly, we meditate harder, we self-analyze more. We work on ourselves as if we're broken machines needing repair. But Buddhism teaches a radically different truth. You are already whole, not someday, not after more growth. Now, the only thing missing is your willingness to see it. Acceptance is the turning of the handle. It's sitting in your own life, no longer wishing it were another life. It's letting go of the belief that something has to change before you can feel at ease. You don't need to fix every flaw. You don't need to resolve every conflict. You don't need to control what comes next. You simply need to be here fully, openly, with tenderness. That's the hidden doorway we keep overlooking. Try this simple practice. Sit somewhere quiet. Place your hands gently on your lap. Close your eyes. Take one deep breath in. And as you exhale, whisper to yourself, I allow this moment. I allow this body. I allow this breath. I allow this life. You don't have to like everything. You don't have to pretend you're free of pain. You just have to stop fighting what is. And in that stopping, something opens. Space, clarity, compassion. Buddhism calls this santosha, the contentment that arises not from getting what we want, but from no longer needing things to be different in order to feel okay. It doesn't mean we don't grow. It means we stop growing from a place of shame and start growing from a place of wholeness. It doesn't mean we don't act. It means we stop acting from urgency and start acting from alignment. You've been standing at the threshold for so long, looking for keys, fixing your clothes, worrying whether you're ready to enter. But the door, it was never locked. It was only waiting for you to turn the handle and step in as you are. So stop knocking. Sit down, breathe, smile, and say to this moment, I allow you, I welcome you, I'm ready to live here. This right here is where your liberation begins, not in perfection, not in arrival, but in your sacred, courageous return to what is. Let peace come in through the open door. It was never far away. It was always you allowing it, and finally returning to yourself. And finally return to yourself. If you've made it to this moment, truly sat with the stillness, lined into the lessons, breathed through the words, then something inside you is stirring. And it's not just curiosity, it's readiness. Readiness to live differently, to live deliberately, to live without the weight of other people's expectations pulling on your every decision. You're ready to loosen your grip. Ready to stop chasing what was never yours to control. Ready to trust the river of life to carry you, not because it's safe, but because you finally trust yourself to float. This wasn't just another video on mindfulness. This was a path back to you. Layer by layer, chapter by chapter, we peeled away the noise, the habits, the illusions, until what was left was something raw, honest, and real. And what is that real? It's the silence that no longer feels empty. It's the calm that doesn't require explanation. It's the awareness that doesn't flinch when chaos comes knocking. You are no longer the leaf being tossed. You are the tree. You are no longer the storm. You are the sky. Let people think what they think. Let outcomes unfold however they do. Let the past rest in peace where it belongs. Because your job now is not to control it all. It's not to prove anything. It's not to win. It's to protect your energy like it's sacred, to reclaim your breath, to walk gently, and to live rooted in what's real, not what's loud, not what's trending, but what's true. So if this video spoke to you, if even one sentence felt like a mirror you've needed for years, don't rush away. Let it land, let it live in you. Let it change something quietly from the inside out. Because when the world comes calling again, when the noise rises, when the old habits whisper, you'll know how to return, not outward, not upward, but inward. And that's the only direction that ever truly mattered. Thank you for staying with this video until the end. It's not a small thing, it's an act of courage. This was a video filled with insight, compassion, and the timeless teachings of Buddhist wisdom, grounded in real life. If it brought you clarity, if it offered you peace, if it reminded you of who you've always been beneath the noise, then don't just move on, share it, bookmark it, watch it again when the world shakes you, and most of all, live it. Because no one and nothing can touch the calm you've cultivated inside. Not anymore, not ever again. You are free now because now you remember who you are.